Hey everybody, it's Fieldset Zurb and I got another video for you. This one is on Foundation's forms. So if you want to learn how to create some really awesome forms with Foundation, you can definitely do that with the built-in styles. So let's take a look at how forms are built in Foundation. So forms are using your typical elements that you're used to, but I'm going to show you how to size them and arrange them on your screen so they can be responsive. So let's take this example here. So we're going to start with our form tag. And the Foundation forms can be sized using rows and columns, which makes it really nice if you want to be able to create a responsive nature for this. The other thing to know about Foundation form styles is that they are styled based on the input type. So you can see that this is input type text here, and so is this other input. Both of these are styled based on their input type rather than a class that you need to add. So that does make it a lot easier to set these up quickly and have the right styles. You don't have to remember a bunch of different classes. So we're going to since we have this in a grid, we have two medium 6 columns here. So that means on a medium and larger screen, they're going to both be 50% width. So if I change that to medium 3 and medium 9, you can see that now this first one is in a 3-column container and this one's in a 9-column container. So I can quickly and easily size my inputs just based on the Foundation grid. So what that means is if I'm going to make this small 12, and small 12, then on a small screen these should stack one on top of the other. So now I'm creating that more common responsive pattern on a mobile screen where form elements are stacked on top of each other. But then when there's more real estate, we can have them sit side by side and be whatever width we need them to be. So that's the first thing you need to know about the Foundation form styles. They don't need a class to be styled. They're styled based on the input type, and you can use the grid to size the inputs. So again, I can use this with anything else. So input type text, I can make this input type password, and input type email. And the placeholder controls the text that's inside. So I'm going to change this to email and password. Okay, and then that's going to change the text that is inside the input. Now another important thing is the placement of the label. So labels are important for accessibility but also general usability. If somebody clicks on the label or focuses on the label, it's going to focus inside of the input. And that's really important for usability. So if somebody clicks on the label, it's going to focus inside the input and they're ready to type. So the reason that is, or the way that is set up in this case, is the label is actually wrapped around the input. So as you can see here, we have our input with the label wrapped around it. So what that does is it tells the browser these two are related. A click on the label will focus inside of that input that's inside of it. Another way to set this up, and also a very good way to set this up, is to do it a different way. So we're going to have our label all by itself, and then we're going to have our input underneath the label. Okay, so this is the order that you would normally see it as. And then we're going to add a for attribute. So label for equals, and then we're going to add an ID of email. So then I'm going to put an ID of email on my input. And so by doing this, now I am attaching this label to this input. When I click on it, it will still focus inside of the input as you would expect. So two different ways to get the label attached to an input. This way is great, especially if you want to visually hide your labels but still have them accessible to things like a screen reader, then this is a good option for that. Now, Foundation helps you style a bunch of different input types, so we're not just limited to email, password, but all kinds of other ones. And on top of that, we can also do this with a text area. So if I want to create another row here after this one, so let's start another row. And I can add another column. Let's just make this one small 12, so it's going to be full width. And I'm going to add a text area here. Okay, so the text area tag will be styled using Foundation as well. And so we can also set up the columns and the rows like normal. So this is a good way to size your text area, especially the height of it. You can set a fixed height to a text area, but I found it's always better to use rows and columns to size it, in particular the rows. So something like 15 if I want to make it a little bit taller, or maybe I want to make it a little bit less, I'll just make it 5. And the columns is ignored because these inputs are set to be 100% width. So again, they're the width of the container that they're in. So in this case, it's in a 12 column container. It's going to span that full width of the row basically and fill up that space. So already I've created a really simple form system right here. And of course I can set my text area up again with a label, just like I did with the input that's above. So this is label for text, and then I'm going to put an ID of text in here. And so now my label is attached to this text area. So you can also set up select menus in Foundation. And again, it uses the same rule for creating a label that is attached to this select. In this example, if I click on the label, it focuses on the select itself. So again, that's another best practice. So I'm going to replace this text area here with a select. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. The select is also going to be 100% width, so whatever the width of the container it's in. If I make this a 6 column container, it's going to only be 6 columns wide. So that's how easily you can adjust these to work with any kind of content that you have, or also make it responsive. And so a select is just made with a select tag, and then you have some option tags. The value is necessary here to display the value, and then of course the text of the value goes inside as well. And so when you choose one of these values, it's actually printed up top here like a standard select would look, but it's now styled nicely with Foundation, a little bit nicer arrow and border, and this kind of focused state as well. Now there's also Fieldset Styles in Foundation, so if you create a Fieldset task with a class of Fieldset, then it will style that for you. So let's go ahead and copy this example here, and we'll paste that into our form. So I'm going to kind of remove all of this extra stuff. I'm going to use my grid setup here. So right now I have a single column medium 6. So I'm going to add my field set with my checkboxes in here. We can make this, let's make it full width 12 columns. So the field set is created with a field set tag with the class of field set. And then you can have a legend if you want. The legend is placed at the top of the field set like that. If you don't want the legend, you can just delete it, omit it, whatever, and then it just creates this nice box around your inputs. So any kind of inputs can go in there, but we have some checkboxes. So Foundation also styles some checkboxes for you. So you have an input with a type of checkbox, and that creates a checkbox. The label is important because the label needs to be attached to this checkbox. So again, for usability, I can click on the checkbox itself, but it might be a little bit hard to click on that directly, and being able to click on the label itself is much nicer. So what we have is our input with an ID of checkbox 12 in this case. So we need a matching for attribute. So we have their label with the attribute for, and it has the ID of checkbox 12. So as long as these two IDs match, it knows that they're attached to each other, and you can toggle the checkbox on and off just by clicking the label itself. Now, Foundation has a class of help text. And help text is something that you can add right underneath an input usually, and it'll just give a little bit of helper text. So there's context to what type of input you want them to put in. So in this example, there's some rules here about how the password should be formatted. Make sure you get that emoji in there. So anyways, that help text class is available. What it does is it just spaces it nicely underneath the input. It's made specifically for this use case. Now, sometimes you might want to have your labels off to the side. So you can definitely do this with Foundation, and Foundation helps you line it up. So let's take a look at this example here. So we're inside of our form, and I'm going to add this code here that we copied from the docs. Great, so let's take a look at what we have. We have a form tag, and then inside of that a row and two columns. One column is small dash 3, and the other one is small 9. And so that sets us up here that where we have a 9-column input on the right and then the label on the left. So the label is attached to this input again with the for attribute. So the for attribute has an ID of right label, and then the input has an ID of right label. So when I click on this label, you can see that it focuses inside of this input. Now this is set up using the grid. So if I needed a little bit less room and I wanted this to be 10 columns, I could definitely do that. So now it still fits nicely. If my label is a little bit longer and I want to give it some more breathing room, I definitely can using the grid again. So we'll bump that up to 4. We'll make this an 8. And then you can see that everything fits nicely. Now there's also alignment classes for these labels. So if I want to align this label in the middle, I can just add a class to it. So let's hop back over to our label. So we have a class of text-right on this label. So we're using Foundation's typography helper classes here to kind of line it up left, right, middle. So we could actually do text-left, and then it'll move over to the left of this container. We could do text-center, and it'll move to the middle of the container. But importantly, we also want to vertically align it. So we can add the class of middle, and what that's going to do is align it in the middle vertically of this input. So that's a really nice way to set that up, especially if I get these a little bit closer together. You can see that they are vertically aligned to each other. Now, Foundation also has inline labels and buttons. So this is great for giving context to what the input is and then also creating actions off of that. So I'm going to copy this example and let's take a look at it. Now I'm going to keep this column structure. I'm going to make two different 6-column containers. I'm going to get rid of this label and I'm going to put this input group here instead. Okay, so the input group is what we're looking at on the left. So the input group is made up of a wrapper class of input group. So input-group, and then inside of that we have a span with a class of input group label. So this is where you would put that context for what we're looking for. So in this case, if I was looking for an input that wanted dollars, I could put an icon here for the dollar sign. Or I could put in some text, like US dollars. So it's basically a way to label the units or the purpose of this input in a very explicit way. So you'll see this a lot throughout websites and web apps. So this is how you set that up. Then we have our input next to that. It has a class of input group field, and that just helps line everything up nicely. That way the input group label is the same height, it's butted up against it. And in this example we have an input type number, so we can actually use the built-in browser number spinner to increase this. And then if you want to have a button on this as well, so we have a wrapper class of input group button that's inside of this input group, and then we have an input type submit with a class of button. So you can style an input type submit with a class of button, so that's really important. This is using the button class in Foundation, but on a form element, which is an input type submit. So that's how you can set up an input group. Of course, you can rearrange these things to be in any order that you want. So if I want the button to be first, then I'll put the button first in the code, and I'll put the label maybe last. So you can really rearrange these any way that you want, whatever makes sense for your content. And last but not least, a really useful thing is that you can create a file upload button with Foundation's button style. Now the file upload button by itself looks really ugly, so this is a nice thing to have. I'm going to put it in this right side 6-column container here. So this is what the file upload button looks like in Foundation. It consists of a label and the input type file. Now if I got rid of the label, which is actually what is styling this, then you could see that the input type file so this is what an input type file looks like without Foundation styling. It's pretty ugly. So if you want it to look like a Foundation button, we have that style for you in the docs. Basically it is a label with a class of button, and the label is attached to the input type file, again with the for attribute. Just make sure the IDs match. And that will make sure that you have a nice looking input type file button. When you click this, it's going to look on your computer for some files. So if you hop over to the docs, there is a Sass reference here. It's got all the Sass variables that are available to style your forms. You can change the margin bottom, the padding, the legend padding, the focus, box shadow, just kind of all the different settings that you would expect to control are easily controllable using the Sass settings file. And since there's so many components in Foundation, the fastest way to learn is with the Intro to Foundation class that we teach here at Zurb. I'll put a link below if you want to check that out. And this is Rafi from the Foundation team signing off. Thank you.